Welcome to the Learning and Development Podcast. I'm David James from Loop, and I'm joined this week by Gemma Paterson, Alice Collier-Niblett, and Kevin M. Yates. And I'll welcome you too. The current crisis has changed plenty. Some will last well beyond lockdown, some will pass. One thing for sure, that organisations will want to make up for missed opportunities when restrictions are relaxed, and businesses will want to make up for lost revenue. We can anticipate an unforgiving period in the short to mid-term, and L&D will be under greater scrutiny to make a significant contribution. To this end, we can expect a hastening of some emerging trends in L&D, such as the pivot from learning focus to affecting performance and productivity more reliably and in order to affect results. And I'll be exploring what this could mean with our guests today. Before we get started, I encourage those of you joining us live to tweet using the hashtag L&D Podcast Live. And whilst we might not get through your questions, I'm sure the back channel will be full of rich conversation and we could get involved afterwards too. But now, without further ado, let's get into it. I'll come to each of you in turn and ask how you're doing. Gemma, can I start with you? Where are you? How are you personally in light of the repercussions of coronavirus, and how have you adapted?
Great to be here, David. Thanks for having me. It's so I'm here in East London in my flat where I've been for 51 days now. I've not left really the sort of mile radius around my house. How am I? I would say I'm feeling grateful today. I'm feeling grateful to be part of this conversation. Feeling grateful that I'm still managing to stay in touch. Feeling really grateful that I'm managing to perhaps try some new things and tap into some old things that I haven't done for a while, just being part of this whole crazy lockdown situation.
Wonderful, and thank you for being involved today, Gemma. Alice, where are you? How are you? And how have you adapted?
Hi David, thank you for having me. So I am in Isleworth, which is South London. I'm in my flat with my husband, and we've been in lockdown for about 8 weeks now. So and I've always been a bit of a glass half full person, and I try and look for the positives in situations, but I've definitely got used to the new normal. I'm getting into more healthy habits and taking my time in the mornings. Like I realized even at the start of lockdown, I would still set my alarm early and rush to kind of get into work and get on my laptop. But I've learned to take a step back, and that's definitely something I'll take away from this experience, is just to slow down a little bit. And I've just had the opportunity to reflect and think about what's next, and I'm actually really enjoying that element of this. So yeah, I think I'm doing okay, and I think I'm probably going to take a lot of positive things out of this.
Wonderful, thanks Alice. And Kevin, where are you, and how are you personally, and how have you adapted?
Hi David, thank you so much for inviting me to join this discussion today. I've been looking forward to it ever since you invited me. I am here in Chicago, Illinois. And in terms of how I am feeling, I would say the word that describes me is adjusted. I'll be transparent and say that the first few weeks of sheltering in place were very difficult. Pretty much being restricted to my home and really not being able to go out other than to get groceries or do some other critical errands. And so that was a little difficult. Not being able to go to the office was a little difficult, but now maybe 60 days later, I've adjusted to what I call business as unusual. And so I'm just grateful to be able to continue to work, and really particularly grateful to be able to continue to have these kinds of conversations. So I'm doing good, and I'm excited about today, and really excited to join Alice and Gemma. Yep.
Wonderful. Thanks, Kevin, and thank you all for joining us. Now, first question. L&D teams everywhere will have faced disruption to their business as usual, or Kevin, business as unusual now, whether they'd relied heavily on face-to-face, whether they were trying to promote online self-directed learning, or whether they'd already had in mind that they wanted to more predictably and reliably affect performance and results. Now, Gemma, how has the current crisis impacted the way you and your team have approached your work?
Well, it's been a bit of a double-edged situation, really. So I'm actually brand new into a new organisation. I joined Legal & General at the start of the year, so in January, so just sort of 6 or 7 weeks before this all started to happen. So I've started a new role as Head of Development Experiences and Innovation. And what I've really sensed is that this has been a massive opportunity for us. So a lot of the things that we were doing previously were quite in the traditional space. So quite a lot of reliance, like you say, David, on face-to-face and sort of the more traditional way of doing things. What this has really done for us, it's been a really big opportunity for our team as talent and development, because the business are now looking to us to help to drive some of that change and drive some of that new normal, which has been really exciting to be part of. And to give you a bit of an example, we were working on a leadership development program that had been in development for a while and looked set to develop over another couple of months and then hopefully launch later in the summer and run to the end of the year. We were actually able to accelerate that and get that out to more people than we'd originally planned, and to do that in 2 weeks. And that would never have happened without this current crisis that we're in. So we had to change, we had to adapt. And actually, as a result of it, we've been able to help a lot more people. So for me, it's been a real positive, I think.
And that's wonderful. Sometimes we can be restricted by the expectations of both ourselves and others. If there's an expectation that the cornerstone of that's going to be a face-to-face element, because that's what our people expect, and that's where we expect the real change to happen, then sometimes that can limit our thinking. But that seems to be the same across the board. It doesn't matter what part of the business that you work in. Those old norms of, well, we need to be face-to-face in order to do business, that's gone to the wayside. But with a keen eye still on the results rather than necessarily just the activities, I think we've all as a global community had to adapt. And Alice, what about you? How things changed and adapted for you at Monzo?
So for us, I think we were kind of midway through kind of generating new kind of processes and thinking about digital first a little bit more. We were starting to move away from face-to-face training and thinking about how we were supporting performance through our digital resources. So we were trying to think about that a little bit more anyway, and we were trying to think about the impact that we were having and what the biggest blockers were in the organisation. So we were kind of doing that little bit of work already. But what this has done, similar to what Gemma was saying, it's given us like a real booster, and it's just all the things that we were talking about and trying to move towards has just been accelerated. So we've been able to bring people along the journey with us because everything kind of just had to stop, and we had to think about, okay, now we really have to use digital. So we were able to kind of help to get people on board and create resources with other people in the business. So that's been really positive for us. It's also helped us to think a little bit more about how we're working as a team. So we were previously we were talking about how we could start to take this sprint mentality and do that to help get resources off the ground quickly. So we did that with some of the things that we were trying to create, and it just really showed us that we could move at pace. And that was really exciting, and it's helped other people in our collective, even outside of people development, to do that too, because we showed that it could work for the type of work that we were doing. So that's been really great for us. That it really has just sort of supercharged everything that we wanted to make happen, and it's been a great opportunity for us to do that.
It seems as if what you've just described there, Alice, is certainly what I've observed across social media, that L&D have had to move at pace to address what is actually going on, which has perhaps burst some of the mythology around, I'd say not around program development, because program development is still lengthy and time consuming and can be expensive in more ways than just money. But in providing the solutions that people need in order to perform at pace, I think that we've surprised even ourselves and our stakeholders at what we have been able to achieve in such a short amount of time with not a great deal of foresight, because who knew this was coming to such an extent. How about you, Kevin? Going back to the original question, how has the current crisis impacted the way you and your team have approached your work?
So I think that not only me and my team, David, but I would just say the L&D community globally, what I'm seeing, and I'm very excited about it, is a shift in focus, right? So now that face-to-face training has literally been taken out of the equation, right? So now we have to narrowly focus on intentional, specific, purposeful, targeted outcomes for training, learning, and talent development. So what this time of pandemic has really given us opportunity to do is pause and really answer the question, why are we doing what we do? So for me, training, learning, and talent development fulfills its highest purpose when it measurably impacts behavior, performance, and actions. So now what we have to think about are, first of all, what are the behaviors, performance, and actions that we want to narrowly and specifically target? And then we ask the question, other than face-to-face, what are the different modalities and experiences that will either influence or change or build those capabilities that we've targeted? So again, David, for me, this time of pandemic has changed our focus. And I'm very excited about that because I believe that as a profession, we are now more narrowly focused on outcomes, knowing that one of the modalities on which we heavily depended, again, has literally been taken away. We now have to really be thinking about what is it that we want to influence or change in terms of behavior, actions, and performance.
Again, it goes back to, if we can't see people develop, and for the audio version of this podcast, I had air quote marks, then we do have to focus on the outcomes we're looking to achieve. And we've had a question asked by a viewer here, Lizzie, wondering if the content of these examples has changed as well as how it's being delivered. And Alice, you know, we spoke on of the recent podcast how user insights has helped to shape the solutions that you're providing. And of course, we might go into to face a problem or building a solution with a set of assumptions, but it's with those user insights that you've been able to adapt and flex the solution to more closely meet those problems. And that's been the case, hasn't it?
Yeah, definitely. I think when we moved into this at the start of the journey, we still had people coming into the business, and what we were doing was we had to basically work quickly to move what was our physical face-to-face onboarding and move it over to digital. So we used the insights that we already had, because we had been collecting data for some time and just asking new starters what are the challenges that you've been having and what are the blockers that you're experiencing in the first 3 months that you have when you join the company. And that helped us to straight away create an experience online, because we already had that information on kind of what the problems were, so we knew where we could create these resources, understand how we were having an impact. So rather than just sort of taking what was face to face and saying, okay, let's just move this directly online, we were able to create a bit more of a journey and do it from the learner's point of view. So that was really useful for us just to have that data.
And we'll be moving on and talking about data in certainly more detail shortly. And as I mentioned, many organisations have moved at pace over the last few weeks to put something out there to support their people. And many will be rushing to develop a more comprehensive online learning provision. But we run the risk of valuing products over results and making rash decisions we're likely to regret later. Now, Kevin, you contacted me recently about the need for this conversation to happen because you feared this would be the case. And this is not the time for L&D to entrench into usual decision making, is it?
Yeah, and you know, David, I did share a post about this very topic, maybe 2 or 3 weeks ago. And so on the one hand, what I am very empathetic to and sensitive to is the need for the training, learning, and talent development community and professionals to produce learning resources very quickly. Because again, we've not experienced this type of disruption. I mean, this is disruption from pandemic in the literal sense of the word. We are literally being disrupted. So on the one hand, there is a need to be agile, there's a need to be quick, and very responsive to the learning needs of people and organizations. So we do have to produce things very quickly. On the other hand, there is a risk of creating what I'll call digital dumping grounds of content without purpose, without intention, and without focus. If we are literally taking content that used to be face-to-face and pushing it into an e-learning format or a virtual format or some other digital format without the intention and the purpose, then it does become a digital dumping ground of content. So therein lies the risk. So on the one hand, I am seeing in the learning and development community globally, teams do incredible things with purpose and intention and making sure that the content that they're creating to meet the needs of work at home employees is aligned to a business goal, has targeted outcomes for behavior, actions, and performance. So on the one hand, I'm seeing that. And then on the other hand, I'm seeing instances where, because of the immediate need to provide learning resources for our work at home workforce, we're doing some digital dumping, if you will. So I think that we have to have the right balance between being purposeful and intentional, and being quick, so that, again, when all of this is over, we don't have mounds and mounds of digital content that we have to go back and take a look at because it's not working, it's not adding any value. So the opportunity now is to just be thinking about that in the forefront. Yeah,
I think that's so important. It's important that we're having this conversation in the first place because of that very reason. But also, Kevin, to step back, to pause for a moment, as you said earlier, and realize that we're not. It's not about providing something. I think that Google, to a great degree, and YouTube and any other trusted platforms over the last decade have provided us with the stuff that we need. But what we don't have is the guidance and support people actually need in the context of their work. So what it is that they are, with what they're trying to do. And the way I like to describe it is that the old world is topic centric. And Guy Wallace has been talking about this greatly in a video series he's doing on LinkedIn, that when you've got your topic centric stuff, when you for the purposes of categorization and delivery, we've chunked our stuff into presentation skills, communication skills, leadership. We've created educational packages that people can dip into and they can learn all about those topics. But what we're talking about here is that people have a real need. They're trying to achieve things, but in the context, in the complexity of being a human being here. Louise Edwards has asked the question: what about empathy and connection? And what we're talking about, starting to talk about here, Kevin, is dialogue rather than delivery. If what we're doing is just providing digital content and expecting that to plug all the gaps, I think that we are making a huge assumption that which will be flawed. But hey, who am I to talk about this? Gemma, you've come from a marketing background, so you know what the traditional approach of buying a platform and filling it with content, and that it's counterproductive because you've been on a journey that I think L&D is facing now.
I think the parallels are really starting to come to the fore between marketing and L&D now, and I think it ties into what you were saying, Kevin, and to your point earlier, Alice, around user insights. I think one of the things that I've really been trying to take from marketing and bring into L&D has been this idea of we're always trying to drive an outcome. So it's never about just doing something, to your point, David, never about just creating content for the sake of it. You're either trying to increase sales or build a following or boost your social channels or impact conversion, but there's always a reason to be doing those things. It's never about just doing stuff for the sake of it. And I think what I'm really starting to see, certainly since the whole pandemic thing, is people are now stopping and asking the question, what are people struggling with? What outcomes are they trying to drive? What are they trying to get done? And before, it never used to be about that. It used to always be about what learning outcomes do we want to drive, or what do we want someone to know as a result of this? But actually, it's like we just want people to be able to help their teams to survive and thrive in this current context. We want people to build meaningful human connections using virtual technology. We want people to get their jobs done, but having to do that when they're not in the same room is difficult for them. So how do we help them? So it's more about really understanding what those needs are. And I know people have talked about this before on the podcast, David, but one of the things that I find really helpful, thought it was worth reiterating, is using the 5DI process to do that. For those who are not familiar with it, it's a design methodology rooted in design thinking. But what that always starts with is defining the business outcome that we're trying to achieve. So look at what are we trying to drive, and that gives us a measure of success. So then we can say, as a result of doing something, have we achieved what we set out to do here? And that gives us our sort of guiding star, our guiding light, our North Star that will hopefully help us to achieve those outcomes.
And I think some people will take that as be almost a ruthless approach and taking the heart out of learning and development. But during the any exploration, there is acknowledgement of emotion, isn't there, Gemma? I mean, this is what marketing's done. Marketing isn't just a load of messages blasted out to people, telling people what they need to be thinking. It is about the heart. But you can only brands that are succeeding are the ones that seen to be caring, but learning and development isn't now about performance and results at all costs, is it? You have to acknowledge the emotion.
Absolutely agree. I think it is really key. So part of what I mentioned in answer to the last question was, how do we recreate those really meaningful moments of connection between people, and what can we use to do that? Because I mean, we're all here on video, that helps to a degree, but there are so many other things that we need to be doing. So part of what I see our team's role as playing in this new normal is, how do we create that environment where people can do the most brilliant work of their lives? How do we really create that psychological safety? How do we help managers contract with their people to give them that safe space to do really good work? And how do we look at sharing our stories of how we've done that? So how do we really bring storytelling into it and use this as an opportunity for people to be a bit more human? And one of the topics that we talked about in our leadership development program last week, actually, the topic was disruption and vulnerable leadership. So it was all around, how do we really lean into that vulnerability as leaders and use this moment in time as an opportunity to start to create more of those meaningful connections.
And we shouldn't look at the track record of learning and development and using technology in, say, e-learning, which almost strips the humanity out of anything, sterilizes scenarios, and then presents this as an all-encompassing education experience, where really it's an experience devoid of emotion, of connection, and simply that of broadcast. And Alice, from your roles at both ASOS and now Monzo, you know that that our role in this isn't just of online content provider, and that doesn't cut it.
Yeah, I think you're right, and I think a big part of our role to help make it more human is to go out there and ask people, what are the problems you're having, and actually speak to people. And especially with what's been happening recently, where we're trying to get content out there to help support people, as Gemma was saying, whilst this is happening, and help managers to support their teams. It's about asking them, what are the challenges that people are having, so that we're understanding from our people, from our learners, and in that it makes L&D more human, because it's coming from the people that we're trying to help. And I think we can't obviously just assume the role of publisher, because we need to be thinking about the work that's happening behind the scenes. So if you don't do that analytical thinking before you put content out there, you're not going to be able to have the impact that you want. So I think if you can take manager training as a really good example of this, you could sort of say, okay, we need manager training, so we'll just kind of push some stuff out there, and it will be really great digital content. It's going to tick that box, but actually it's not going to be useful, not going to have the impact that we want, unless we have asked managers in the business, what are the problems you're having, but also gone to the great manager and said, what are you doing that's really right? And then we can see the gaps between the two, and then if we address those gaps, that's how we can have the impact with things like manager training. So it's just being able to do that kind of analytical thinking in the background, and put your energy into understanding what that problem is and how you're going to measure it, rather than sort of trying to get something out there in the quickest way possible.
We've had plenty of questions coming in. Cindy Alexander, to summarize the question, she has a program, a top talent development program, where people are nominated to attend. A big portion of that is face-to-face, and so there's a risk that if they make that 100% virtual, then it won't feel special in the same way. And I think that's absolutely right. Tracy Waters speaks about this in the episode that we recorded together last year, when they moved to a learning at the point of work, which was data driven and stripped away training programs. Whilst they found that they were more successful at addressing performance, productivity, and therefore results, there was this gap, which was the 4 R's, which was recognition, reward, relationships, and another one I can't remember, but maybe maybe 3 of those is a teaser for you to go and have a listen to Tracy's podcast, find out what the other R is, and some tips on how they address that there. Alice, staying with you and getting to the crux of this conversation, the new measures of success that we allude to in the title here aren't a new formula for calculating the effectiveness of a training course or suites of online content, are they? Could you give us an insight into Monzo's data-driven and people insights approach?
Sure. Yeah, I think as an industry, we're definitely moving away from just trying to understand if something, if it was the right length, or, did you like the trainer, all of those kind of things. I think that that's definitely not an accurate representation of the effectiveness of what you're delivering. So we need to be asking different questions now. And I think for us, the first part of that journey was trying to understand what our deliverables were for 2020. So what are our priorities as a team? And I think I'll talk about it in a bit, I think, but it's just thinking about how we can help to prioritize the work that we're doing. And once you've kind of got that established, then everything that you work on, if you ask the right questions at the start of the journey, so who are you trying to impact? How will you measure this? What's the aim of your training? And you're just making sure that you're getting to that right information from the start with that set of questions and having a process, then you'll be able to make sure that you're measuring it effectively. So that's what we've done. And now everything that we create, every time someone comes to us and says, I think that it's worth us putting something out there, we'll say, okay, well, does it match up to the priorities of the business? Is it in line with that? And then we understand how we're going to measure it from the very beginning, so that we're able to ultimately kind of stand up in front of the organization eventually and say, these are the things that we worked on in the last quarter. This is what we were trying to impact, and here's the data to show that we made the impact and we moved that dial. And I think it's also important to think about not just having those questions at the start of the journey, but also when you put something out there.
Oh, we just lost you there for a moment, Alice. I think that we might be struggling with an internet connection. Which was quite a moment to lose you, because it isn't just about putting stuff out there, but maybe maybe we can continue answering that question and continuing that conversation with another of our guests. Kevin, if I come to you, you are the L&D detective.
Yeah.
How are you looking afresh at this measurement problem?
So, the interesting thing about where we are, excuse me, is that what hasn't changed is the need to measure. Right. And so in pandemic, out of pandemic, working at home, not working at home, there is still the need to measure the results and the impact of our training and our learning solutions. And so what's exciting for me about that is that it remains constant. Now, what might be a little different is what we measure, right? Because pre-pandemic, we measured performance in the context of most people working in an office, right? After pandemic or in pandemic, we have to figure out how to measure impact and results while people are working at home, like literally everybody, well, most people anyway. So in terms of what we measure, we still need to be targeted with what we want to measure. So what is the behavior we expect to impact with our training and learning solutions? What is the performance we expect to impact? What are the actions we expect to impact? And then in terms of thinking about how we measure impact, we need to now be contextualizing what performance means at home. We need to contextualize what behavior means when you're working at home. We need to contextualize what it means when you're taking action while you're working at home. And then we look for the key indicators that measure what that means. So in terms of what's different, what I think is a little different is the contextualization of how we measure. What we measure is still the same, because we still got to measure performance. We still got to measure behavior. We still got to measure outcomes and actions. But how we contextualize what we measure determines how we measure. I hope that makes sense.
Well, I wouldn't mind going a little bit deeper on that. You say about how we contextualize, and if we brought this down to an L&D team, we've got L&D manager, advisor, you may have content developers. What does that look like? Is that a conversation? Is that are you gaining insights with surveys? How is that done?
So I think that it's the way in which we measure is going to take a number of different formats, and that hasn't changed, right? Because the way in which we measure while we were working in the office required different measurement techniques, and the way that we're working while we're at home is going to require different measurement techniques. So I like to call it a chain of evidence, as cliche as that sounds. But if you start with a business goal, as we've talked about, You start with the business goal and you talk about how you measure the extent to which learning and training impacted that business goal. So you're always going to start with a business metric. And then you're going to take a look at performance metrics. So even while we're working at home, how are we measuring people's performance? You want to take a look at business performance metrics. You might even want to take a look at, like post-program learning surveys to give signals about the extent to which you can expect an impact. So to answer your question, David, it's just the different pieces of data and evidence that you capture and measure along the way. So now we just have to figure out what that means while we're working at home. So for example, how will Kevin's performance be measured by Kevin's manager, right? Whereas Kevin and his manager may have had, a close day-to-day relationship. And that manager may have been able to literally see how Kevin is working and see how Kevin is behaving. Well, now you don't have that anymore, right? So that means that I believe we're going to have to rely even more heavily on data as an indication of performance. Because if at the end of the day, performance is what drives everything, then we need to have insight into data points that show what performance looks like when it is executed. Does that make sense? And did it answer the question?
It does, yes, it makes sense, and it answers my question. But I think it leads nicely on to Gemma, because we're talking about this stuff like it's emerging practice in L&D. But again, Gemma, with your experience in marketing and now leading L&D functions, how are you looking at measurement in a way that you borrow from marketing, but is relevant and helps to guide you in L&D?
So a few things. I think definitely to your point, Kevin, it's thinking about how do we measure performance when we're in a completely different context. And I think there's something that could be a little bit dangerous in there if we go down the route of the wrong kind of metrics and the wrong kind of measures. So we could be measuring how many hours is someone spending at their laptop screen. Like, that doesn't equal performance. We know that it doesn't. They could be playing Candy Crush. They could be on Facebook. They could be doing anything. And I mean, all of those things are part of life and needed anyway, but I guess it's not a true measure. So I think we need to be really smart about why we're using data. Like, what story are we going to try and tell with that data? Over the last sort of few roles that I've been in, so at BP, PA Consulting, Aviva, and now at L&G, we've always really focused in on that outcome-driven approach. So perhaps now we need to be helping managers and leaders to think less about how work gets done and more about driving for that outcome, and really helping to clear the way of blockers so that someone can get to that outcome, and trusting that person to go on that journey and drive that. I think in terms of sort of answering your specific question, David, around how are we measuring? I mean, there's a number of different ways that we can measure how someone interacts with a piece of learning. And then what we're trying to do is look at how do we then connect that interaction with a business metric or a performance metric. So to give you an example, we have, as part of one of our programs that are running at the moment, we have an online tool called Hive, and we're able to get some really great data out of the back of that. So we're able to tell how many people are registered, revisiting, interacting, commenting, liking, sharing, all of that good stuff. However, that doesn't tell us anything about their performance. It doesn't tell us if it's impacted at all. So I'm lucky enough to work with a really amazing group of people at L&G in our people analytics team, who are really forward thinking in this space. And what they're trying to do is to really collaborate with talent and development to understand how we can marry up interaction data around programs and how people are using digital and virtual content with actual business data. So look at things like progression, performance, career moves, all of that good stuff, and looking at how can we make inferences between the data and really understand what's driving what and what isn't driving what, and then feed that back into us so that we can then iterate our programs and change them over time.
Thank you all for your responses there. We're getting a lot of questions on the nuts and bolts of, well, how do you do this, and how do you bring an organization along with you, which I know that we're looking to cover in many of the other questions, but just to let you guys in on that. So we're all in agreement then, pretty much, that we can't develop or buy a solution, make it available, and then retrospectively try to measure the impact in any meaningful way. It's about understanding and quantifying the problem first. Gemma, in making this accessible, can you give us an example of how you've done this, if not at L&G in the few weeks that you've been there, certainly over your career, and what that's meant for measurement?
Yeah, absolutely. So to sort of just trying to bear in mind the nuts and bolts question around the how we do it, hopefully try and shed a little bit of light on that. So one of the problems that I've been trying to tackle is working with our pricing team and looking at how long it takes to price products and get them to market to customers. And the challenge that we had is there's a lot of manual work in there, which means it's a very slow process. But if we can automate some of that process, obviously that's going to become quicker. The time to price a product reduces, it frees up our people to work on more value add stuff, and actually solves a customer problem. They get the product that they need quicker. So I guess instead of starting with we need to train everyone to be quicker at pricing, we looked at it from the other side, and we looked at how might we eliminate some of the manual elements of pricing. And that may be a learning and development problem, and it may not be. It may be a process problem, it could be a business problem. And I guess where we got to through that process is to help the people who are doing the work to eliminate some of those manual elements through performance support resources in their workflow, looking at how we can introduce elements of coding into what they're doing around that. And the impact is that we save time, and we can actually measure that. So we can say, instead of it taking 8 weeks to do this, it now takes 8 hours to do this. And that for me is like a really solid metric. But again, it's not a case of we plug Google Analytics into the back and it told us how many people were on there. It's really working in collaboration and in partnership with the business to really understand what the challenge is and then unpick it, and to know that actually talent and development and learning isn't a silver bullet that's going to fix that. It's actually bringing people along with you, it's partnering, it's collaborating, it's being part of the same task force. And I think Alice mentioned earlier around working in scrum teams and running sort of sprints around how they get stuff done. We're trying to do much more of that as a team, so bringing people into the work with us who are actually part of the process that we're trying to fix, or part of the problem that we're trying to solve, and designing with and for them.
Yeah. And I think that goes some way to answering a question we've just had from Pete Salisbury, who asked, if a number of solutions are proposed to solve a significant business issue, of which only one is an L&D solution, do you have an example of how you might be able to measure the direct L&D contribution regards improving performance? But I think that what you've just described there, Gemma, unless I've misinterpreted, is that nobody's looking at saying I made the difference there. You've got a task force together, which L&D is a part of, who is able to facilitate I'd say a performance consulting conversation, but perhaps in a more consultative and collaborative way. You'll be working with, as your words, with and for the client in order to make the difference. Because after all, the old world of training, you'd deliver it and then you'd live and die by whether that was effective or not. Gemma, your training didn't work. You know, a whole cohort of people and their managers might tell you. But if you are working in collaboration with people and solving a real business problem, then you can help with a solution and facilitate. But when it comes down to it, the people doing the work have to do something different in order to get the results.
Totally agree. And the point there, I guess, is that we're not the experts in L&D. I'm not an expert in pricing or coding or any of that. But what I can do, like you said, is facilitate a really great performance conversation that's really going to help to change the way that people look at things, from thinking that training is a catch-all to thinking that actually there are a few different levers that we could pull here and we could really have an impact on performance by doing that.
Hey, David, can I add to that? Because this conversation and that question is one that I get so often. And, you know, again, that question is, how do we attribute exactly a change in behavior, performance, or actions, or a business goal to training, learning, and talent development? So here's the honest answer to that question. So shoot me if I tell the truth. You cannot pinpoint exactly that training did something by itself. When you're measuring the impact of training, the science is almost as much about measuring what happened because of training as it is measuring what would not have happened in the absence of training. And so then, to Gemma's point, the idea here is that achieving goals and improving performance is a team sport. So the way in which I work is to identify all of the contributors and influencers to performance, and all of the contributors and influence to achieving a business goal. And then when you identify those different key players, it's almost like slicing the pie, right? So if you want to achieve a business goal, what are the different parts of the pie that achieve that business goal? So the contributors to achieving a business goal might be training and learning. It might be marketing. It might be HR. It might be innovation. It might be recruiting. So the essence of what we really have to be focused on is not just L&D as the sole contributor to performance and achieving business goals, but rather L&D is a part of that team that is assembled to achieve business goals and influence people's performance.
One thing
I totally agree.
and I think just to build on that, Kevin, what I find in my work is that even understanding the real problem and how that is being experienced by the people gets you so much closer to solving that problem than the old way, which was being advised of a performance problem, then translating that into a learning need, and then aggregating common needs up to a level of abstraction almost, so that you could deliver a standardized program or content for which people then attend on the day. They're asked, why are you here? And they say, I don't know, because they don't recognize it. We're either so far past when they experience the challenge, or it's been abstracted to such an extent that they no longer recognize it. And then what we do is we wonder why there's been no change. But what we're talking about here is if you truly understand what it is that we're seeking to affect, because it's a real problem that the people that we're working with understand and experience keenly that it's a problem, then we are well down the right road in order to affect that. And I'd love to come to you, Alice. Oh, yeah, go on. Sorry, Kevin.
No, I want to give Gemma and Alice an opportunity to jump in here. But the other thing I want to share as it relates to what we're talking about and the biggest challenge to measuring impact, I think that there is something that is so easy that we as a profession can do that we're not doing, that I am doing more of. So if the question is, what is the impact of training on learning on performance? Why not ask the people who are expected to perform, right? So here's what that means for me. I can ask someone to share with me, what does it look like when these behaviors show up real time, day to day? What does it look like real time when these actions are showing up in your role on your job? What does it look like when you are performing the way that the business expects you to achieve a business goal? That then gives me insight into the evidence that I can collect and gather and search for that shows the extent to which what they described is showing up. So when it comes to measuring impact, measuring results, we got to go to the people who are expected to perform and ask them, what does this look like? Because they have answers that we don't have, because we aren't close enough to the business in that way to be able to have insight into what does it look like when people are behaving and performing and acting in a way that's been identified as critical to achieving business goals. So for me, that's kind of like the secret sauce when I'm doing my data detective investigative work, and I'm looking for facts, evidence, and data that shows the extent to which training, learning is impacting behavior, performance, and actions. I'm asking people, what does it look like? What should I be looking for? And that's such an easy way to do it. Yeah.
And first of all, thank you all for your responses. And what we're describing here is what Trish Yule on a previous episode of the podcast talked about, formative as well as summative data. In L&D, we have a history of looking for summative data that seeks to understand what impact our actions may have had, but that we've been weaker in looking for and fully understanding formative data, because we too quickly translate, as I mentioned earlier, performance needs into learning needs, which are fairly easy to design or procure a solution for. Kevin, what mindsets and practices do L&D professionals need to unpick to be able to see the whole picture of performance, productivity, interdependent relationships, etc., and act from a better place of knowing?
Yep. Thanks for asking. And I don't want this to be the Kevin show. Certainly want to hear what Alice and Gemma are thinking as well. But just in terms of what needs to change from a mindset perspective, for me, it's very simple. We need to shift our mindset from the training, the course, the e-learning, the thing that we create as being the deliverable. We need to shift that and say that what we deliver is impact. It is no more complicated to me than that, right? Because right now we're focused on creating that thing. We're focused on delivering that thing. But when our mindset says that what we are focused on is building and creating impact, and that thing we create is the vehicle by which we do it, then our focus changes, right? Because if we're focused on delivering impact, we're focused on performance and we're focused on business goals. And that connects to a lot of what both Gemma and Alice have talked about. So for me, the mindset shift is move away from creating a course and move to creating impact.
Brilliant. Alice, again, working in an environment that's building L&D on these new foundations, what do you think L&D needs to do to fast track to these new measures of success?
So I think touching on what we've said earlier, I think there's this idea of becoming a bit more of a consultant and being able to speak to the people that you're creating these solutions for and understanding them and the problems that they're having. So I think it's getting into that mindset and going out to the business and understanding what the business wants to get to in the future. So I think it's kind of like putting yourself into the center of the business so that you're an integral part of that. And I know lots of the things that we were saying so far are around, that you need to be able to push the business forward. And if you do that, then if you want to become an integral part of it, then you need to put yourself there and you need to have those conversations. So I think it's just about doing that. So going out and speaking to people. So that's the first thing. There's continually getting feedback. So there's this idea of like having your data. It's not taking a stab in the dark and guessing what people need. It's about understanding that and knowing how you're going to measure that from the start as well. For me, I think the best way for us to get started was to look at how we can create a process to be able to do that in the first place, so that we're kind of like building our resilience and we're able to do that. So whenever anyone comes to us and says we want to create something, we have a process that we can follow. So I think if you know that that's what you're going to do and define those questions before you create anything, then that's how you're going to know that you're having that impact. And don't just leave your stuff out there as well. So once you've created something, don't just leave it there. I think every other kind of, department or like team, if you look within your organization, wouldn't just sort of create something and leave it there. They would review it and see if it's been effective in what you're trying to do. So it's thinking about that as well. So go back to your things and did it have the impact that you wanted it to? And if not, why? And again, that comes back to you being able to speak to the people you're trying to influence. So I think just having your ear to the ground and having that connection with the business is hugely important.
And about talking with them about stuff that they care about primarily, not the learning stuff that we've got, trying to push our agenda and saying, what did you think of this? How do we make this better? It's being in their world to understand what it is that they care about, what they're not able to do efficiently or effectively, and then understanding their ground zero, as it were. So we're not looking back after a year and thinking, did what we do make a difference? You are looking after week 1, month 6, month 12, are we making progress towards what it was we were seeking to affect in the first place? Now, Gemma,
yeah, and I think it's about being...
I've got a slightly different take on that. Oh, sorry, Alice, I cut it right across you. Sorry.
That's all right. That's okay. I just said, like, yeah, I just reiterate that it's about being iterative. I think I just wanted to kind of reiterate that point really, and the way that we can understand if we are impacting the things that we want to be impacting, we can go back and have a look at those resources and solutions that we've created. So I think if we're talking about whether we've been able to influence what we wanted to, it's like a process, and we might not nail it the first time, but it might be like the second and third time that we go back to it and we realize actually we weren't hitting the nail on the head, but the changes that we made have started to move that dial. So if you look at it as more of a process rather than we're going to get it right first time, then it's likely that you'll be more confident in the impact that you're having.
And perpetual beta should be a desirable state. If I mean, it scares people to think that it's never going to be finished, especially with L&D, where we used to a one and done delivery. You know, everybody gets through it, and after 12 months, it's done. But perpetual beta it should be a desirable state, because you recognize the reality that people are in and performing in, and that you've got the opportunity to influence again and again and again, as long as we're adding the requisite value. Gemma, you developed a digital skill set, then moved into L&D, so you've probably felt this keener than most. What do you think L&D need to unpick in order to work on the right stuff and measure progress?
So I think, and perhaps not the answer you might be expecting from me, but I do think we need to give ourselves credit for how far we've come in L&D. So we're not all sat there going, face-to-face is the way, we just do courses and then it's fixed. I really do think the conversation has shifted, and I've been in L&D for quite a while now. And what I've seen certainly over the last sort of 5 years or so is that the conversation really has shifted towards more performance consulting, and people are taking that mindset, to Alice's point about iterating and it never being finished. We're always in beta, we're always learning. So I think we do need to give ourselves credit. I definitely think there are things that we can do that will make us even better. So one of those things is looking at the types of people and capabilities that we have in our teams. I think that's a really important one, especially when we're thinking about measurement and data. So think about the makeup of talent and development or learning and development teams differently. Have we got the right people in the team who can take the data on what people are doing and then analyze that to really understand the impact on performance? Because that's quite a different skill set to a traditional L&D skill set. And what we've started to do in our team, where we find that we perhaps haven't got that entire skill set, is looking out into the business and saying, where is this happening and where can we tap into it and collaborate a little bit more? So can we collaborate with people analytics or even the marketing team or the digital team, and look where there are those bright spots in the organisation that we can tap into and learn from and bring their skill sets into our teams. I think I'd really like us to see us as L&D taking cues from things like marketing and integrating tools into our measurements. So looking at things like Google Analytics, but again, really starting with the outcome and making sure that everything that we're doing is achieving that. And I think the bit you've just said there, Alice, has just really resonated with me about being okay with not getting it right first time. That for me is the crux of where we are right now, like in this pandemic context that we're in. Like, how do we really make sure that we're trying, we're failing, we're learning, we're iterating, we're improving, we're measuring, and we're seeing what the impact is, and it being okay to not get it right. So I think we can't be too curious is my sort of go-to mantra at the moment. Stay curious.
Wonderful. I'm going to go back to the questions, because I think that this is one that we haven't fully covered off. Laura Cox has asked, how do you really manage the business challenge of just getting content out? Everyone is now a learning expert, she says, and just what's the content to tick the box and be seen to be doing something. So she says quite rightly, it's easier said than done with challenging stakeholders. So how do you pivot? I mean, for me, it starts with the first conversation, but has anybody got experience of taking an organization with them?
Yeah, I think that you have to quite honestly pick your battles, and it's about how you have the conversation, and it's about being empathetic, right? Because on the one hand, I think we need to be empathetic to where businesses and organizations are right now. So there is a sense of urgency, there is a sense of immediate need. And so when a stakeholder or a business partner comes to the training or the learning and development team and says, I don't have any time to have a conversation with you about impact, I don't have time to have a conversation with you about business goals, I just need you to fulfill my order for training, right? So, that's going to happen. So let's manage our expectations. But in the midst of that, we can still be looking for opportunities where what we do and what we create and our meaning and our intention has the opportunity for impact. So for me, it's finding the right balance between hearing the business's voice, the organization's voice, and honoring what they've requested. At the same time, in the midst of all that swirl, looking for opportunities in the request and in the conversation to say, I hear you, let's pause for a moment and let's talk about what you've asked me to do and where there is opportunity for us to measure the result for what you're asking us to do. So it's striking the right balance between, you know, fulfilling the order, but at the same time looking for opportunities for measurable impact.
Wonderful. Thanks, Kevin.
I think
Anybody
there's
else like
something in
to?
there around contracting up front as well, sort of helping people to understand how the role of L&D is different now, because people don't interact with learning teams all the time. They might come and do it once a year, once every 2 years. So just setting out your stall of this is why I'm here, and this is what I can help with, and this is what we do, and this is what we don't do. I think that can really help to sort of build that trust and that empathy. And you sort of wouldn't go to a doctor and say, I don't want to have the consultation, you can't examine me, I just want the drugs, give me the drugs. Like, you just wouldn't do that. So I think it's just getting people to understand like why you're asking those pushing, challenging questions, and that it's coming from a place of love and a place of wanting to help.
And Alice, any advice?
Yeah, I completely agreed. I think that one of the things I learned quite early on, which to much frustration, is that you can't impact everything at once. And even though you want to grab everything when you move into an organisation and move it all into this new way of working, it's just not possible. So I 100% agree with Kevin in talking about picking your battles and picking the things that you can influence. For me, I think I mentioned it earlier, it's just about having that clear process from the very start. And I'm looking currently at trying to make that a bit more formal, and it might sound like a little bit boring that, you know, everyone has to kind of go through answering all these questions with me at the start, but it just makes it a bit more sort of official. So, you know, everything that we're creating, we're making sure that we've got all that information up front, and it doesn't take long, but just go over here, fill in a few of these questions for us, and then we can start off the journey together. And I think it just puts us all on an equal like playing field straight away, and then we're able to make sure that what we're doing is going to be we'll try and make it successful, and try and have the impact that we want to have. So yeah, I 100% agree. It's about having that right conversation from the start.
Wonderful. Thanks, Alice. And then the final question. Anna D'Alfonso has asked, what resources exist for the new L&D professional in this area we're speaking about? But I wonder whether this could be useful for everyone, because, you know, we've talked about all of this stuff, and although the podcast will be available next week, not to plug it too much, we realise this isn't a standalone learning event, that hopefully people will be motivated to go elsewhere and continue their development in the new measures of L&D. If I could come to you first, Kevin, I know that you've got to rush off shortly. Where would you recommend that people go to learn more?
Well, what I'm really excited about, I hope that this is an unofficial shameless plug, but the Learning and Performance Institute has recently launched LPI Learn, which is an amazing resource for the global learning and development community. So, in particular, as we think about how we're working in these times, so I would just highly recommend that our learning and development brothers and sisters out there go out and take a look at the Learning and Performance Institute's LPI Learn.
Wonderful. Anybody else? Any recommendations, Alice?
Yeah, I think one of the things that I would really suggest is speak to the data teams, and even some of if you have them in your organization, like the tech teams that are working in sprints and things like that, and learn from them, because I think taking yourself out of learning and development and putting yourself in other worlds might help you learn some tricks and tips that you can take in. And that's definitely how I've started to explore the way that I'm using data, and taken some of those processes that other teams are doing and borrowed some insights from them. So I just say put yourself out there and have conversations with people outside of learning development as well, and also listen to this podcast, because I think the people that have spoken on this, yeah, I think I've just learned so much from having the great speakers on this podcast, and lots of other great ones. So check out the Learning and Development podcasts.
I second that.
Thanks, Alice. Thank you. And Gemma, any recommendations from you?
So sort of linked to Alice's point, actually, I would say look externally from your organisation if you can. So look for inspiration from other people who are facing into the same challenges and problems that we are, and not necessarily just in L&D, but I know even just from today, I've now got 2 new friends outside of my organisation that I can reach out to and see how they're tackling these problems. So I'd say having those conversations, especially a time like this when like I'm a massive extrovert and I am missing people, like seriously missing human beings. Just reaching out for a virtual coffee and a conversation is a great idea. And I think Twitter's brilliant for that as well, just sort of making those connections. In terms of really getting to grips with how we set those metrics, the 5DI model is a really great one, and that's in Nick Shackleton-Jones's book, How People Learn. And yeah, I would just say, just try stuff and be okay with learning and it not working first time. We're all gonna learn stuff together through this weird time that we're in.
Wonderful. Thank you very much to my panel for their valuable contributions. Thank you.
Bye, everybody.
Now, not everything is Thank you, Kevin. Now, not everything is going to change when we come out of the other side of this, but then again, not everything will go back to the way it was. Before we adapt our practice, we may well experience a change in stakeholder expectations for which we need to be ready. And not just to deliver what we're asked to, but to be ready to have conversations that matter, that are more keenly focused on the priorities facing our organizations, and that are focused on outcomes rather than products and activities. From there, we can measure progress and success rather than be looking over our shoulder, worrying whether we're adding enough value. It's up to us now to develop and to adapt. Now, if you'd like to get in touch with me, perhaps to suggest topics you'd like to hear discussed, you can tweet me at David in Learning, connect on LinkedIn or Facebook, for which you'll find the links in the show notes. And goodbye for now. Thank you.